Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today an amazing gentleman. His name is Dee Brown. He is president and CEO of the P3 Group, Inc. Now, P3 is P3 because private, public, and what is the third one?
Public-private partnerships.
Okay, the partnership is the P. Dee comes with an amazing record. He's been in real estate business for 27 years. He's managed and succeeded in overseeing all sorts of phases of multi-million-dollar construction, infrastructure, water, sewer, environmental projects for government and private and public sector clients. You know, Dee, that is something that so many people aspire to. How do you work with business, private and public, make it come together and be profitable? Because there's so much of those government regulations and strings that are put on people, I think, that make it more difficult. And so a lot of people opt out and don't get involved. So I want you to talk about that. But before you do, I want to also just share with the audience a little bit more about your background. He's a national advisor on public-private partnerships and the urban redevelopment for the National Bar Association. He's recipient of the National Bar Association Congressional Black Caucus Philanthropy Award. He's recipient of the U.S. Minority Contractors Association, the Thurgood Marshall Legacy Award, and the recipient of U.S. Minority Contractors Award for Sustained Leadership and Success in Project Management, Real Estate Development, and Sales. So you're a part of the Forbes Council on Real Estate, and the list goes on in terms of what you have done, what you've accomplished, the honors that you've received. So congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But tell us, how did you get into it? And how have you managed the public and private sector?
Sure. So the story spans back, as you mentioned, about 27 years. Actually, I just hit 28 years about a month ago in the business. And I started by going to meetings with one of my uncles who was interested in getting into real estate development. And so I started going to meetings and realized that I really don't have a clue what they're talking about in these meetings. So I was in college at the time, and I started taking real estate courses that led to me getting my real estate license. And so I started out in real estate like a lot of people do, just residential sales. And then I kind of transitioned into doing rehabs. That led into me doing commercial and developments and residential subdivisions. And as I continued my career in real estate development and sales, I became interested in government contracting, particularly after 07, 08, when the market got really soft during the Great Recession. I decided to get into the construction industry, doing highway, street, and bridge construction for government clients. And so in that role, I constructed all sorts of projects from bridges to culverts to demolition of school buildings, et cetera, for government agencies. And we did that and we were very successful. And I kind of just slipped into the public-private partnership world by getting a contract with the Army Corps of Engineers and 3 districts that required me to provide heavy equipment packages on a short-term lease to the government because they had the forces to execute the work, but did not have in their budget to purchase the equipment. And so they entered into a lease agreement with me to lease the equipment. And that was kind of my first taste of public-private partnerships. And so after doing that project and then later being awarded a project with the U.S. Nuclear Command Center at Goose Creek, South Carolina, I decided, let me kind of merge this government P3 sector opportunity with my background on real estate and real estate development. And so that led to me getting into the more traditional P3s that we do now, which center primarily around social infrastructure and hard infrastructure for government agencies. And so now we're doing complete design, build, finance solutions for cities, counties, school districts, colleges, and universities. And it's saving them a lot of time and a lot of money. And so you mentioned in the opening that there are a lot of regulations that make government work very, very difficult. And so that's the interesting component about public-private partnerships. In this sector, we're actually easing regulations because you have the private sector executing work, delivering projects for the government, but you're doing it on the private sector. So it's this kind of quasi-governmental type process where we have all the luxuries and conveniences that you enjoy in private sector work, but the end result, the end product is for the benefit of the government and for the citizens that government represent. And so whether we're doing fire stations, police stations, whether we're doing infrastructure improvements for parks, whether we're doing student housing, student unions, K-12 schools, the end project benefits the community in which that project is located in, but that project is being delivered by the private sector. We're doing it with our design team, our construction team that we put together, and we're going to the capital markets, issuing the tax-exempt debt to fund the project, and then we're leasing those completed projects to the government for a period of time, typically 20, 25, 30 years. And at the end of the lease, they own the asset. And so they get the benefit of ownership without having to go through the process of trying to issue the debt themselves or taking construction risk and other risks that we actually transfer to the private sector.
So, Dee, tell me, one of the things that we hear about is the length of time that it takes for a project to get approved. Because you're part of the private sector, that time is truncated. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So it really depends on the motivation of the government agency and how quickly they want to get the project delivered. So we can move as quickly as they want to move, or sometimes it does take some time to get all of the votes collected on the city council or board of supervisor or college board to say this is the route we want to go. And so to give you a case study, we have a pre-K school that we're building in Illinois. That project, from the time that we executed our development agreement to when we broke ground, started construction, was 78 days. That's almost unheard of.
Wow.
We have a project that we did in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where it took us 84 days to break ground from the time that we got the approval to move forward with that project. So where it may take on a traditional government project, sometimes 2 to 3 years to get the project under construction, sometime longer, we're able to cut that time down considerably by being able to execute the project in the private sector, because we don't have to get all of the approvals at every stage of the process once the government decide that this is the path they want to take to get the project delivered. And so that has become something that agencies are realizing is very, very valuable, that time component, reducing the time of execution. Because during COVID-19, what agencies have found is that projects that they thought they could get done for $10 million are now $13 and $14 million projects. The cost of construction increased considerably over the last 18 months or so. And so being able to deliver projects through a public-private partnership give you that opportunity to lock in today's prices, start construction sooner, and really cut a lot of red tape out of the process.
So part of what you're saying is by going into this partnership, you're able to control costs, you're able to deliver projects on time, and do it in a more managed way. So you always hear about the nightmares, especially when it comes to infrastructure types of projects. So tell me, if that is true, why don't we do more private-public partnerships?
Well, I think that a lot of communities are learning that this is the path to take, especially smaller communities where they do not have the technical expertise and resources to execute complicated projects on their own. And so oftentimes the reason that these nightmares occur is because smaller communities that lack the sophistication to execute the project take the project on anyway. And then they try to execute the project without those technical skills that are really necessary to have a project delivered on time and on budget. And it ends up being a nightmare situation. In our process, the construction risk is transferred to the private sector. So the government does not hold any construction contracts whatsoever. When we close that contract, we have already agreed that the project will be completed for a certain price. And then we complete the project for that price, on time, on budget, without exposing the public partner to change orders and other risks that are associated with constructing projects.
So when you're involved in this, what challenges you the most, Dee?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is really educating the community and the community leaders that this process is actually a good process for them. And that though there may be some fees associated with executing this type of project in this manner, there may be some fees that you're not accustomed to seeing in a typical government procurement process, that this process is actually a much more efficient and cost-effective way to deliver projects because we have an integrated project delivery method that we utilize, meaning that all of our team is integrated from concept through final construction. Our architects, engineers, construction managers, general contractor are all at the table from the concept of the project through the actual completion of construction, which means that the contractor can give the architect real-time feedback as it relates to design decisions that are being made and what those design decisions, what the ramifications of certain decisions are to the project. So it allows us to control costs. That's a mechanism that does not exist in your typical design bid build process, which is that traditional delivery method that government agencies are used to executing on. And so what happens is that once the architect make a design decision operating in a silo by themselves, then once it goes out for bid and the contractor gives a price, that is the price. You own that design decision at that particular point, even though it may be cost prohibitive to the project. And so that's why you hear these stories about projects coming in over budget because you lack that integration of all of these technical skills.
Dee, what you are doing requires a tremendous amount of sophistication. A lot of moving pieces have to be put in place. How did you learn it the first time as you were going about putting a public-private sector partnership together?
Well, that's interesting. I attack all businesses the same, which means that conceptually you can understand you're trying to get from point A to point B. And so what I guess the thing that I have that's my strength is that I recognize that I don't know how to get from point A to point B by myself. So what I do in every business that I engage in, I build a team around me that can take me from point A to point B. So when you start bringing on experts to your team and they tell you, well, don't forget about you're going to need to cover this base right here. And we bring in an expert to cover that base. And so eventually you have a full team built out because you brought on the right experts who had the wisdom and insight to say, here are all the bases we need to cover. These are the team members we need to have at the table. And so as we started to build that team, we hired the right lawyers. We hired the right bond underwriters and investment bankers. We hired the right architects and engineers, the right general contractors, the right construction managers, the right owners, representatives. And so we essentially built out that team to where we brought all of those skill sets together and people who had significant experience in operating in all these different technical areas. And so that's how you build a company. That's how you build a successful team. And so I tell people all the time, while it's really great to know what you know, it's even more important to know what you don't know, because only then can you bring in the talent and skills to supplement for that.
Dee, that requires a whole lot of honesty, right?
Correct.
And as leaders, sometimes we don't want to have that personal self-assessment and honesty. We like to think we can do it all.
Right.
Right. And that's problematic. So I respect that tremendously. What would you like public people to know as they, you've got cities who have a project and they are planning within the city council or whatever, what they want to do. In that process, what would you like them to consider, talk about, think about, so that you can absolutely shine at what it is that you do for them?
Sure. So I think most importantly, community leaders need to really take a step back and look at all of the options that are available as it relates to delivering public projects. Public-private partnerships are a great solution. Maybe not for every single scenario, but for a significant number of scenarios in terms of when there are serious budgetary constraints that you have to adhere to, when you are trying to execute a project and conserve your general obligation capacity, when you want to get a project delivered quickly under a robust system, public-private partnerships offer a great option. Also, from a risk mitigation perspective, a well-structured public-private partnership should transfer a significant portion of the risk to the private sector. And then the private sector use risk mitigation tools to ensure that the interest of the public is also protected. And so when I talk about risk mitigation tools, I mean that, for example, when we hire a general contractor to construct a project for us, that general contractor posts a payment and performance bond just like they would do on any other public project, meaning that they're guaranteeing that the project is going to be completed on time and on budget, right? And then we also have owners' representatives, construction managers who actually oversee and manage the day-to-day activities of the contractor to ensure that they are staying on target with their schedule, to make sure that when they submit invoices, that the work that they're billing for is actually in place and that it's also meet our QA/QC standards. And then we have construction administration from the architectural team. And the architectural team is also inspecting work that's in place, making sure that the work is being built to the specifications within the construction documents. And so all of these items serve as risk mitigation tools to make sure that this final product, this final project is actually what the end user bargained for. And so when we take that risk on our end, if there's an error, then we have to make sure that our team absorb the cost to correct that error. It's not on the government. It's not at their foot to deal with. And so there's a significant amount of risk that can be transferred away from the public sector to the private sector by structuring a public-private partnership. The other thing is also that sometimes there are projects that are very critical to the community. And sometimes the government may not have the time or may not want to go through a public referendum process. They may not have the time or the luxury to go and get a vote of the people to execute a project. Oftentimes, a public-private partnership can offer a solution to voter referendum requirements because you're entering into a lease agreement versus issuing the debt directly. And that arrangement can, again, save sometimes years out off the entire process.
Wow, that's unbelievable. I hadn't thought about that you shift it from owning to leasing, and that by its very nature changes a lot of the dynamic of the process. So Dee, when people are looking at private-public partnerships, people will be listening to this. Some may go, wow, that could be fun. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think that the devils are always in the details, right? So when you enter into a public-private partnership, it's very, very important that the roles are defined, like what expectations rest with the developer, what expectations reside with your public partner, what risk the public partner may have in the transaction based on certain acts that may take place. And so I'll give you an example. We have a program called our Build Better Student Housing Initiative, where we are delivering student housing and other essential infrastructure to colleges and universities. And under our program, the college is not required to sign for debt on the transaction. That we have our nonprofit partners or affiliates that come in and issue the debt, fund the transaction, and then actually share the revenue with the college. And so one of the questions that comes up oftentimes is that, okay, well, if we're going to lease you our land to build this building on, what happens in the event of a default, right? And then educating the college that when you lease a land into a bond transaction, that the bondholders only have the rights of the tenant. And so in the event of a default, the bondholders become the tenant and are obligated to adhere to the same terms and conditions of the lease as the original issuer of the debt. And so it's an education process so that they can understand and get comfortable with how they are transferring risk away from them and what their exposure is in terms of events that you may not think are likely to happen, but that could happen in a potential transaction.
So there are so many things always to think about, aren't there? For a person who's starting out right now and thinking about a private-public partnership, where do you begin? Do you begin by going and talking to cities? Do you begin by going and talking to other people who are contractors who are in the private? Where do you begin the process? Because to me, it's huge.
So our process always began with talking with the agency that has the need. And so whether that's a city, county, a college, university, or some other governmental agency, that's where our first stop is always there. And so normally we're talking to the agency, understanding what the need is, understanding what options they have available to them in order to get the need fulfilled, and then making an honest determination of whether or not a public-private partnership is the right vehicle to execute that project. And then from there, what we found that's helped us with our success is that we have a team of experts that are with us on every transaction. So we don't really have new people at the dance trying to learn the system each time we execute a project. We have the same lawyers, the same investment bankers, same architects, engineers. We do bring in general contractors and subcontractors because those are positions that we believe are critical to the local community. And so we like to the fullest extent possible, make sure that local contractors, like local subcontractors, are actually at the table executing and building the projects that we are constructing. And so that way we can leave the money in the local community from that perspective. But other than the GC level and subcontractor level, the core team that we have that put the deal together and get it to the finish line is the same team on every transaction. And so it's really about just what's different from a public-private partnership than a regular developer. We're listeners. Like, it's not about us. It's about the community and the impact the project is going to have on the community. So we don't have any preconceived notions on what a project should be or shouldn't be. We're listening to the stakeholders, and they're telling us what their needs are. And then our goal really become the role of consultants and advisors to say, this is how we think your project could benefit from a public-private partnership. And sometimes we have to be candid and say, we don't think a public-private partnership is right for your project. There are a lot of occasions that we turn down just as much opportunity as we get, because in order for us to be successful, each project has to be a win-win. It can't just be a win for us, it has to be a win for the community as well.
Dee, we have talked for almost half an hour. And so what have we left out that you would really like the audience to know?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I think the audience needs to know about public-private partnerships is that it is a viable solution for communities of any size. And so one of our, bright spots in what we do is that we focus on communities heavily that are underserved, communities that lack the technical resources, communities that have been overlooked in terms of economic growth and opportunity. We look to go into those communities and empower those communities, empower the people within those communities by giving them opportunities. And so we have a saying here at the company that we know that the only way to empower communities is through empowering its people, and empowering its people through job opportunities, empowering the people through increased capacity. When we leave those communities, that they're better off than when we came, and that the projects that we deliver not only serve the purpose that we were called there to deliver the project for, but also lead to further economic development, further economic opportunity, and serve as a catalyst for redevelopment within those communities. And so that's the thing that we focus on as a company. Those are the principles that I think guide our decisions every day. And I think those are the things that make our company different than other companies that are in the development space.
I love what you say about being a catalyst for the community, because I think right now, as people have come out of COVID, we're looking for that connectedness, but we're also looking for people who will bring together a community and just help us solve our own problems, right?
Right.
And so having somebody like you who has that as their mission, I think is really powerful.
It's a powerful tool. One of the things that we do that I think is very important for people to know is that we never charge a community $1 for what we do. So when we come into the community, if we meet with you and we go through the process and you decide that you do not want to proceed with the public-private partnership, you don't owe us anything. We try to educate. We try to provide the best advice possible. And then if the public-private partnership route is the route that works for the community, then great, we'll do a deal together and we'll serve the community and we'll build a successful company and have a successful project. But to the extent that the project doesn't make sense for a public-private partnership, or the community leaders feel that this is not the right fit for us, we're never paid for our services. And so whether it's ordering feasibility studies, where communities sometimes spend hundreds of thousands of dollars ordering feasibility studies for projects that never go, when we're working with a community and a feasibility study is needed to determine the viability of the project, we pay for the feasibility study. We pay for the environmental reports. We pay for the engineering and surveying and all those things that are required to execute a project. And in the event that the project doesn't go forward for any reason, the community is not on the hook. And so we think that it's important that we provide value and that we show good faith when we're working with communities. And the way that we show good faith is that we're coming to communities to make some substantial financial investment within those communities. And so if we feel like a project is not a good fit for a public-private partnership or not a good fit for our company, we have that honest and candid conversation on the front end. And once we decide that it is a good fit, that's why we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, and we're willing to make the investment in those communities on behalf of the communities and the citizens that the leaders will put there to serve.
Wow. I love that philosophy of really taking ownership of what it is that you are presenting and providing. But it's more than that. It's that value added that you're really bringing. And it's what I think more and more people are asking for. So thank you so much for that perspective. Dee, thank you for being with us today.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
So those of you who are listening to Building My Legacy podcast, thank you for being with us today. And remember to visit our website as well at buildtomorrow.com. And again, Dee Brown, thank you. We will have, by the way, information about Dee in the show notes so that you can contact him. And for those of you who are thinking about a public-private sector partnership, certainly we would encourage you to look him up, contact him, and to at least evaluate whether or not he would be a fit for your project. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.